Imagine life as a game you've been playing since the moment you were born. The only difference is you never touched the settings. You arrived in a world that had already chosen your character, your role, even your goals. You grew up inside a program written by others, completing missions you never signed up for. Carl Jung referred to this as the default mode of the ego, when a person believes they are the role, not the player. From childhood, you were taught to become someone, the good one, the smart one, the reliable one. You began to build your persona, the social mask Jung said was necessary to survive, yet deadly if you forget you're wearing it. Everything falls quiet. You start to see that the harder you try to be perfect, the emptier you feel. You're winning a game you never wanted to play. Alan Watts once said, "When you stop trying to win the game of life, you begin to play it." Jung took it further. He said that when you awaken and realize you've only been acting, that's when the real game begins. Because only then can you start hacking your own mind. Look around. How many people you know are living as if they must pass an invisible test, trying to appear right, kind, strong? How many are afraid to live differently for fear of breaking the rules? But this game never had rules. It only had programming, and you can rewrite it any time you choose. Jung said, "Who looks outside dreams. Who looks inside awakens." When you look within, you begin to see the code. You realize the persona is only the shell, and behind it lives the one who was forgotten. When you become aware of your own role, you don't have to break the game. You just play it consciously. No longer reacting, but choosing. No longer living to prove, but to experience. In this video, you'll learn how to hack the game of life using the map Jung left behind. Not to win against anyone, but to understand yourself. Because only when you realize who's holding the controller does the game truly belong to you. Jung once warned of a quiet illness unique to the modern age: the perfectionist syndrome. When you identify with your role for too long, you begin to believe that only by being proper, admirable, and loved do you have worth. That is the moment the persona, the social mask, takes control. You become the best version of yourself that others expect, but lose the person living beneath the act. You know what to say to be loved, how to behave to earn respect, how to smile so no one feels uneasy. Yet the more skillful you become at this performance, the farther you drift from yourself. Everything falls quiet. You start to feel tired, hollow, as if life has turned into a game with no reward. You wake each morning with the weight of meeting the standard, instead of simply being alive. Jung called this the trap of the perfect persona, where the soul becomes imprisoned behind a smiling face. You might think you are doing well, but beneath the surface, the shadow begins to build. Each time you swallow anger to appear calm, every time you hold back tears to seem strong, every time you say, "I'm fine," while breaking inside, you push another fragment of yourself into the unconscious. Jung said, "What we deny in ourselves becomes what controls us from the dark." And indeed, the harder you try to appear bright, the more your shadow pulls you downward. The perfectionist illness doesn't kill through wounds, it erodes through smoothness. It makes you look okay while feeling empty. But that's precisely when the game becomes interesting. Because Jung believed that only when the persona begins to crack can the real light come through. That's when the shadow, the repressed darkness, starts to send its signals. It shows up in dreams, in sudden anger, in the jealousy you don't want to admit. Not to destroy you, but to remind you of what you've abandoned. You can hide it from the world, but never from yourself. And if you dare to look, you'll see that darkness was never evil. It was only forgotten. When you meet your shadow, that's when the game gets interesting. Jung never wrote that line, but if he heard it, he might have smiled. Because that is the true moment of awakening, when you stop running from the darkness within. The darkness Jung called the shadow is not evil. It is everything you once rejected to appear good. It is the anger you swallowed, the desire you denied, the selfishness, the fear, the envy you tried to silence. You thought you erased them, but you only pushed them into the basement of the mind, and like anything buried, they began to breathe. They find their way back through dreams, slips of the tongue, and the pain you can't quite explain. Jung said, "Darkness does not disappear when we judge it, but when we understand it belongs to us." You cannot erase a part of yourself without erasing your ability to feel. Everything falls quiet. You start to notice the small reactions, the person who irritates you, the words that make you angrier than they should, the emotions that rise without reason. Jung called this shadow projection. When you refuse to face something in yourself, you begin to see it in others. The person you dislike might carry the trait you buried. The person you envy might mirror the energy you were too afraid to live. A listener once wrote, "I realized the one I criticized most was simply the mirror reflecting what I feared in myself." That line captures the heart of Jung's work. Because the shadow doesn't come to punish you. It comes to guide you. Think of it like a glitch in the game. The more you try to delete it, the more the system crashes. The only way to fix the bug is to see that it's written in your own code. When you dare to face it, without fighting, without judging, the darkness begins to dissolve. Not because you've destroyed it, but because you've brought it into the light. Jung called this shadow integration. The moment the rejected parts are accepted and reintegrated into the whole. And when that happens, you stop being dragged by your emotions. Stop fearing your reactions. Stop seeing enemies everywhere. You start to see everything more clearly, more lightly. The game stops being terrifying and starts to get interesting, because you finally learn to play with both hands, light and shadow. If this content makes sense to you, click subscribe and stay on this journey. Thank you for staying with this moment. It means more than you think. Carl Jung once said, "Everything that irritates us about others can lead us to an understanding of ourselves." And if you pay attention, life seems to be designed to keep sending you the same kind of people. The liar, the cold one, the controller, the one who makes you feel small. You meet them again and again, as if the game is whispering, "Look closer." When you overreact to someone, it is rarely about them. It is the reflection of the part of you you've avoided seeing. Jung called this shadow projection, the process by which the traits you reject in yourself are projected onto others, like images on a mirror. The person you despise most is often holding the mirror you're afraid to face. Everything falls quiet. Think about the last time someone made you angry. Maybe it was a colleague who bragged too much, or a relative who tried to control everything. Ask yourself, what part of me also craves recognition like they do, but is afraid of being judged? Or, what part of me also wants control, because it fears losing safety? If you can answer that, you've just pulled an arrow out of your own chest. Every time you deny something within, the mind will find a way to show it to you outside, as a lesson that can't be ignored. It's the unconscious self-healing mechanism at work. But most people don't see it that way. They react, blame, condemn, and get stuck in the loop. Each person they meet becomes a new actor in the same story. The more you judge others, the less you see the trembling part inside yourself. Jung said, the shadow you do not face will become the destiny you must live. Meaning, until you acknowledge the rejected part, it will keep showing up in others' faces, asking to be seen. A listener once wrote, "When I stopped hating the person most like me, I began to understand them and myself." That is the soul of shadow work. You don't need to forgive anyone yet. Just pause and ask, whose emotion is this really? Each time you reclaim a projection, your energy shifts. You stop wasting it fighting darkness and start using it to understand yourself. Jung called this the transformation of unconscious energy into conscious awareness. And when that happens, the world around you begins to shift too. The person who once triggered you no longer holds power. The situation that once frightened you becomes an invitation to observe. The game feels less hostile because you finally see that no one is truly against you. Only parts of you still longing to be seen. And if you stay till the very end, you'll realize what most players never do about this life. No one is your enemy. Everyone is a reflection of the lesson you haven't yet completed. After studying thousands of dreams, Jung discovered something strange. Certain images appeared again and again across people from every culture and era, as if the human mind shared a single hidden archive. He called them archetypes, ancient characters living within the collective unconscious. You've met them before, in stories, in films, and in your own dreams. The hero carries your hunger to conquer. The lover awakens desire and the need to connect. The sage watches everything from afar with calm eyes, and there are others, the villain, the warrior, the abandoned child, the mother, the teacher. These archetypes aren't just symbols. They are energies moving within you every day. Everything falls quiet. Think about it. When you get angry, who's driving the wheel? The warrior in you, or the wounded child holding the sword? When you love, whose voice speaks through your words? The true lover, or the part of you longing to be saved? When you give advice, is it the sage speaking, or the ego seeking admiration? Jung said, archetypes have no morality. They are powerful but blind. If you are unconscious, they will possess you. He called this archetypal possession, the state in which a collective energy takes over an individual mind, making someone believe they are the role itself. The person obsessed with saving everyone is often possessed by the savior archetype. The one who sees enemies everywhere may be ruled by the warrior. The one chasing pleasure endlessly might be under the lover's spell. These archetypes aren't evil. They only become dangerous when you forget you are not them. Jung saw conscious work with archetypes as an art. You can borrow the warrior's strength without becoming cruel, love like the lover without losing yourself, and understand like the sage without turning cold. When you recognize these characters living within, you stop being controlled by them. You begin to choose your roles instead of being cast into them. Life becomes a play in which you are both actor and director. You can change costumes, rewrite the script, and remain yourself. And the strangest part is, the more you understand these ancient characters, the clearer your soul becomes. Because they are not out there. They are fragments of the collective spirit entrusted to you to continue living through. When you accept them, you don't just understand yourself. You touch the timeless humanity that every generation carries within. Carl Jung once called this one of the most dangerous traps in depth psychology: ego inflation. The moment when the ego identifies with an archetype larger than what it can hold. You stop being yourself and become a broadcast channel for an ancient pattern. The one who believes they were born to save the world is possessed by the savior archetype. The one who sees enemies everywhere is ruled by the unintegrated warrior. The one convinced that only they understand truth lives in the illusion of the inflated sage. Jung called this phenomenon archetypal possession, a kind of spiritual takeover where the individual dissolves into collective energy. And when that happens, they're no longer the player in life's game. They become the character controlled by it. Everything falls quiet. You might have felt this in yourself, that moment when you feel too right, too certain, too awakened. When you think you've figured out every rule, when you believe you see through everyone else, when you feel there's nothing left to learn. That's the mark of inflation. Because truth never makes you arrogant. It makes you humble. The one who truly understands the game knows no one wins. Everyone is simply learning. When the ego swells, it believes it has leveled up, yet in reality, it has just lost touch with the human self. You start to lose softness, lose the ability to listen, lose the pulse of feeling. Jung said, when archetypal energy floods the ego, the individual experiences a temporary greatness before collapse. Because you cannot hold too much light if you haven't yet learned to carry it with both hands. Remember, archetypes aren't bad. The problem begins when you let them define you. The savior must learn boundaries. The warrior must learn compassion. The lover must learn stillness. And the sage must learn how to be wrong again. When you dare to face the incomplete parts of the archetypes within you, you begin to regain control. Jung called this conscious cooperation with the archetype, the state in which you can use its power without being consumed by it. You become the one guiding the character, not the one possessed by it. The game becomes lighter, calmer, because you finally know that true strength doesn't come from becoming someone, but from knowing when to stop. In the end, only those who can set down the sword ever understand what victory truly means. Carl Jung said that the real goal of psychological growth is not perfection, but wholeness. And wholeness happens only when you can see your own light and hold your own darkness without losing balance. This is the moment the game levels up, when you don't just understand the rules, but begin to play consciously. Jung called it conscious participation, engaging with life in full presence, neither trapped in the unconscious nor detached from it. The awakened player doesn't try to control the game. They learn to dance with its rhythm. They no longer try to fix others because they understand that everyone is learning at their own level. They don't run from the dark because they know the dark is the training ground for awareness. Everything falls quiet. You start to notice that you can see deeper, feel stronger, and hear the subtle sounds within the minds of others. Jung called this superior perception, heightened awareness, the sign of a soul expanding. But he also warned, the more you see, the more you must respect boundaries. Those who see too far easily forget the ground beneath their feet. That's why true awakening isn't about climbing to the top. It's about learning to stand still between light and shadow. When you see others in pain, you don't rush to explain. When you see them wrong, you don't need to prove yourself right. The awakened player knows that compassion doesn't exclude boundaries. Jung called this love with boundaries. The ability to love deeply without dissolving, to help others without losing yourself. The one who has integrated their shadow can love the ugly parts in others, yet not be dragged down by them. They understand that not everyone is ready to awaken. And that doesn't make them superior, only humbler. A listener once wrote, "When I stopped trying to awaken others, I finally woke up myself." That line is the soundtrack of this stage. Because awareness doesn't separate you from the world. It makes you more in tune with it. Jung believed the awakened player is the light bearer of the collective, not through preaching, but through presence. They move through life like a quiet breath, and wherever they go, consciousness begins to stir. You don't need to be a teacher. You don't need to save anyone. Just live honestly and be present. When you live awake, the game around you wakes up too. Carl Jung said that understanding is never enough. You must live what you understand every day. Awakening doesn't happen overnight. It unfolds in small, quiet moments. The moment you observe an emotion instead of reacting to it. Pause before judging. Or notice yourself acting and choose to return to being real. If life is a game, this is how you train to become a conscious player. The first step, Jung called recognition, the act of noticing. Each time someone irritates you, ask, what part of me is this reflecting? You don't need to answer right away. Just look. Observation itself is the beginning of healing. The second step is integration, merging. When your shadow rises, don't push it away. Write it down, speak it out, breathe with it. Each time you accept an imperfect piece of yourself, the darkness loses a little of its power. The final step is participation, conscious engagement. Live as someone who knows they're playing. Light, flexible, not trying to control, but never abandoning the game. When you talk, listen, love, or work, keep a small part of your mind as the observer. Not to disconnect, but to remember that every interaction is a mirror. Everything falls quiet. You begin to realize that this practice doesn't separate you from the world. It roots you deeper in it. You no longer need victory or validation. You just need truth. Because when you live awake, life stops being a battlefield. It becomes a piece of music, and you are both the listener and the player. Jung called this the art of conscious living, not to be perfect, but to be whole. Carl Jung once said, "Man was not born to be perfect, but to become whole." And to become whole, you must pass through 3 gates that most people never cross. The gate of the mask, the gate of the shadow, and the gate of the true self. Each one leads you deeper into the game that few dare to continue playing. When you remain behind the mask, you are only repeating someone else's programming. When you stare at the shadow but never integrate it, you stay trapped in fear. But when you realize that both are 2 poles of the same soul, the game begins to open a new level, the level of freedom. Jung called this individuation, the process through which the soul becomes itself, no longer ruled by the ego, no longer needing a role to be loved. The individuated person no longer needs to prove they are good. They simply live truthfully. They don't try to fix others because they understand everyone is at a different level of awareness. They don't try to control the world because they understand true order lives within. Everything falls quiet. You begin to see that wholeness doesn't mean the absence of darkness. It means knowing how to speak with it. The whole person can be angry without destroying, love without clinging, help without rescuing, leave without resenting. They live in the flow of love with boundaries. The form of love Jung saw as the highest level of consciousness, because only with boundaries can love stay pure. Only with boundaries can freedom last. Jung said, "The one who has met his shadow, who has spoken with the unconscious and still keeps his light, carries the power of both worlds." It is a power not loud or explosive, but steady, like the quiet strength of a deep river. The whole player no longer tries to win the game. They become the game itself, where victory and defeat dissolve into understanding. And if you are still on the path, remember, the very fact that you are reading, reflecting, and observing yourself means the process is already happening. You are not lost. You are evolving. Jung believed that even a single awakened person can shift the structure of the collective unconscious. When you heal yourself, you make the game brighter for everyone. When the game reaches its end, you realize there is no final level at all. Everything you've learned, every pain, every stumble, was only part of the process of returning. Jung called this moment union with the self, when the player and the game become one. You no longer stand outside life observing it, nor are you controlled by it. You simply live, quietly, simply, consciously. Everything falls silent. The people who once hurt you now appear as teachers. The memories you once wanted to erase now form the map of your growth. The parts you once rejected now sit beside you like old friends, asking for nothing but presence. Jung once wrote, "No light is strong enough to illuminate the darkness unless we dare to enter it." And you have walked through it. The darkness no longer frightens you, and the light no longer feeds your pride. They are now two rhythms of the same breath. The game doesn't end with a victory sound, but with a gentle exhale. The player returns to peace without reason. You no longer ask, "Who am I?" because the question dissolves into experience. You don't need to win, or lose, or prove anything. You simply exist, and that is enough. If this message resonates with you, write in the comments, "I choose to play consciously." Thank you for staying until the end of this journey, where every answer dissolves into one truth. You were never meant to become someone else, only to remember who you are.